Leaves everywhere. Not one flower. Sound familiar? Your hydrangea isn't dying. That's what makes this so maddening. It comes back every spring. Green, healthy, full, taking up half your border, and it just refuses to bloom. Or it gives you 3 sad flowers on a bush that should be covered. If it were dying, you'd at least have an answer. Instead, you've got a perfectly alive plant mocking you every June, and every piece of advice you've followed. Prune it in fall, give it more sun, feed it regularly. Hasn't fixed a thing. Here's the part nobody tells you. Some of that advice is exactly what's stopping it from blooming. 5 secrets, all pulled from what's actually happening inside this plant. Not from a generic shrub tag written to cover 500 species at once. 2 things to keep in mind as we go. Stay through secret number 2. It explains the single most common hydrangea mystery there is, and almost nobody who owns one has ever gotten a straight answer for it. And secret number 5 is the one that stings a little, because it means you might be the one who has been quietly stopping your own hydrangea from blooming, one well-intentioned feeding at a time. This channel exists to give you the actual mechanism behind why plants do what they do, not the version written to apply to 500 species at once. If you are not subscribed yet, do it now. Subscribe so the next one finds you directly. Before we start, tell me in the comments how many years you have been waiting on this exact plant to actually bloom the way you were promised it would. 1, 3, longer than you want to admit? Drop the number and your zone. I want to know what we are actually dealing with here. Secret number 1. You are very possibly pruning off next year's flowers without realizing it. This is the single most damaging piece of generic gardening advice in circulation, and it is the reason more hydrangeas fail to bloom than any other cause combined. Here is what almost nobody explains clearly. Not all hydrangeas produce flowers the same way. Bigleaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea macrophylla, the classic mophead and lacecap types most people picture when they hear the word hydrangea, bloom on what's called old wood. That means the flower buds for this coming summer were already formed on the stems last fall, sitting there dormant through winter, waiting to open in spring. If you prune those stems back in fall, in winter, or even in early spring before you can see green growth, you are physically cutting off the flowers before they ever had a chance to open. The plant survives completely fine, it just has nothing left to bloom with. Panicle hydrangeas and smooth hydrangeas, Annabelle is the one you have probably heard of in that second group, work the exact opposite way. They bloom on new wood, meaning the growth that emerges fresh each spring is what produces that year's flowers. These varieties can be pruned hard in late winter with 0 consequence to blooming because the flowers haven't been built yet when you're cutting. The practical fix is specific. If you don't know which type you have, don't prune at all until you see it bloom once so you can identify it by flower shape. Mophead or lacecap for bigleaf, cone-shaped panicles for paniculata. Once you know, bigleaf and oakleaf hydrangeas get pruned immediately after flowering in summer, while you can still see and avoid the buds already forming for next year. Panicle and smooth types get pruned in late winter before new growth starts, with no timing risk at all. Get the timing wrong on a bigleaf variety, and you are not just losing a little bloom, you are removing next summer's entire flower show with a pair of pruners in October and never even knowing you did it. Secret number 2. This is the one I told you to wait for. It explains the mystery almost every hydrangea owner has experienced at some point without ever getting a real answer. A full, healthy, leafy bigleaf hydrangea that produces no flowers, or almost none, is very often not a pruning problem at all. It's a winter bud kill problem, and it's specific to gardeners in zones 5 and 6 growing bigleaf varieties. Remember from Secret 1 that bigleaf hydrangeas set their flower buds in fall for the following summer. Here is the strange part. The buds are the weak link, not the plant. The stems survive. The roots survive. The crown survives. It is specifically those flower buds that cannot take the same cold everything else on the plant shrugs off, particularly during a late spring frost after the buds have already begun to swell, or an unusually cold winter with insufficient snow cover for insulation. The plant leafs out completely normally the following spring because the growth buds survive just fine. You end up with a perfectly healthy bush and a summer with no blooms, and because nothing about the plant looks wrong, almost nobody connects the dots back to a cold snap 8 months earlier. The bush looks fine in April. It looked fine all winter. The damage already happened, silently, in a single hard freeze, And you will not find out until June, when the flowers that were supposed to be there simply never show up. This is exactly why reblooming varieties, endless summer being the most widely known, were developed specifically for gardeners in marginal zones. These varieties produce flower buds on both old wood and new wood, so even if winter takes out last year's buds entirely, the plant still flowers later in the season from fresh growth. If you're in zone 5 or 6 and you've been mystified by a bloomless bigleaf hydrangea for multiple years running, the honest fix isn't a different pruning schedule. It's replacing the plant with a reblooming variety bred to survive exactly this problem, or adding winter protection, a loose mulch mound over the crown and lower stems in late fall, specifically to insulate those vulnerable buds through the coldest part of winter. Of the first two secrets, which one explains what has actually been happening in your yard? Drop it in the comments with your zone, because somewhere in this comment section, there is a gardener who has been blaming themselves for years over something that was never actually their fault. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. 2 secrets in, and you already have the real answer to the most common hydrangea mystery there is. This channel does exactly this every single week. Subscribe so the next one finds you directly. Secret number 3. The blue and pink color thing works on far fewer hydrangeas than you've been led to believe. There is a genuinely fascinating piece of plant chemistry behind hydrangea flower color, and it only applies to one category of hydrangea, which is exactly the detail most casual gardening advice leaves out. In bigleaf hydrangea varieties that are genetically capable of color change, the flower color depends on how much aluminum the plant is able to absorb from the soil, and that absorption is directly controlled by soil pH. Acidic soil, generally below a pH of 6, makes aluminum more available to the plant's roots, and the plant incorporates it into the flower pigment, producing blue. Alkaline soil, above a pH of 7, locks that aluminum up in a form the roots can't access, and the same variety produces pink instead. This is genuinely how the chemistry works. It is why adding aluminum sulfate for blue or garden lime for pink actually does something, but only on the right variety. Here's what that advice conveniently skips. White hydrangeas, including Annabelle and most paniculata varieties, cannot change color through soil pH manipulation at all. Their flower color has nothing to do with anthocyanin pigment response to aluminum. It's simply not present in the same way, and no amount of soil amendment will turn a genuinely white variety blue or pink. If you've been dosing a white hydrangea with aluminum sulfate wondering why nothing is happening, that is the entire reason. You cannot amend your way around genetics. The soil was never the problem, the variety was. For gardeners who do have a color-responsive bigleaf variety, the fix takes patience. Soil pH doesn't shift overnight, and repeated applications over 1 to 2 full growing seasons are typically needed to see a real color shift. Test your soil pH first before applying anything, because guessing at amendments without knowing your starting point usually produces a muddy in-between color rather than the clear blue or pink you were hoping for. Secret number 4. More sun is not automatically better, and the specific hydrangea type you're growing determines exactly how much you should give it. This is where a lot of well-intentioned gardeners cause real damage while thinking they're helping. General shrub advice tends to default toward full sun, and for many plants that's genuinely correct. For bigleaf hydrangeas specifically, especially in hot summer climates, full all-day sun is a mistake that produces scorched leaf edges, dramatic afternoon wilting, and measurably reduced flower quality. Bigleaf and oakleaf hydrangeas perform best with morning sun and afternoon shade, roughly 4 to 6 hours of direct light concentrated in the cooler part of the day. In hot southern climates, even less direct sun with bright indirect light the rest of the day works better than a fully exposed spot. Panicle hydrangeas are the genuine exception here. They tolerate and often prefer significantly more sun, and a paniculata variety planted in too much shade tends to produce weak, floppy stems and a noticeably reduced flower count. One related detail worth knowing so you don't panic unnecessarily. A properly sited bigleaf hydrangea will often wilt dramatically on a hot afternoon, even when the soil moisture is completely adequate, because the enormous leaf surface loses water through transpiration faster than the roots can resupply it during peak heat. It typically recovers fully by evening on its own. If you're watering every time you see afternoon wilting, you may be overwatering a plant that was never actually thirsty in the first place. Check soil moisture directly before adding water rather than trusting the visual wilt alone. The leaves are dramatic. The roots are usually fine. Of the first 4 secrets, which one genuinely surprised you? Not the one you recognized, the one you had absolutely no idea about before today. Drop it in the comments with your zone. Secret number 5. You are very possibly feeding it into producing leaves instead of flowers. Hydrangeas do need fertilizer, but the specific nutrient balance matters more than most people realize, and the generic all-purpose lawn and garden fertilizer sitting in a lot of garages is not the right tool for the job. High nitrogen fertilizer, the kind formulated to green up grass fast, pushes vigorous leafy growth at the direct expense of flower production. A hydrangea fed repeatedly with a high nitrogen product can end up lush, dense, dark green, and almost entirely without blooms, because the plant is investing its available resources into foliage rather than reproduction. This is a genuinely common, self-inflicted cause of a bloomless hydrangea that has nothing to do with pruning timing or winter bud kill at all. You did this one to yourself, with good intentions, one feeding at a time. The fix is a fertilizer formulated for flowering shrubs specifically, one with a lower nitrogen number relative to phosphorus and potassium, applied in spring as new growth begins and again lightly in early summer. Stop by midsummer. You do not want the plant pushing soft new growth right before it heads into dormancy. That late growth is the most vulnerable to winter damage. Less frequent, correctly balanced feeding consistently outperforms enthusiastic overfeeding with the wrong nutrient ratio. So here's where that leaves you. If your hydrangea has leaves but no flowers, work through this in order. Check whether you or a previous pruning cut off old wood buds at the wrong time of year. Consider whether a late frost or a hard winter killed the flower buds specifically while the rest of the plant survived fine, especially if you're in zone 5 or 6 with a standard bigleaf variety. Reconsider your fertilizer choice if you've been feeding it something high in nitrogen. And check your sun exposure against your actual hydrangea type rather than assuming more light always helps. Here is what I want you to picture. Next June, you walk out to that same bush, the one that has given you nothing but leaves for years while you quietly wondered what was wrong with you as a gardener, and instead of 3 sad flowers scattered on a wall of green, the whole thing is covered, mophead after mophead, or a full flush of cone-shaped panicles, depending on what you are actually growing. Nothing about the plant changed. You changed. One piece of bad advice you finally stopped following. That bloom was always in there. It just needed you to stop doing the thing that was quietly stopping it. One question for the comments. Which of these 5 explains your hydrangea? Tell me which secret and tell me your zone, because there is very likely someone else reading this comment section with the exact same bloomless bush and the exact same confusion, wondering if they're the only one. If this video finally gave you the real answer behind years of a hydrangea that would not bloom, that is exactly what this channel does every single week. Subscribe so the next one finds you directly. One more thing before you go. Next week on this channel, the same 5 secret treatment, but for lilacs. If you have ever had a lilac that grew huge and never flowered, that video is going to explain exactly why, and it comes down to a mistake almost as common as the pruning mistake we just covered here. It goes live this week. If you are not subscribed, it will not find you. Hit that button now so it lands directly in your feed the moment it publishes. I'll see you next time.